Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chesnut.
And I'm Uranio, Paes.
And today we are talking about the Enneagram's 27 subtypes, but in the context of relationships.
People always benefit from talks about relationships. And as you all know by now, if you follow Enneagram 2.0, CP Enneagram Academy, which is BNI, we have a big emphasis on subtypes. So two different themes coming together, hopefully with lots of good content for all of you. And we decided to do this in 3 episodes. So we'll talk today about the body types, 8s, 9s, and 1s, but then 9 different kind of people, body type people, because there are 3 subtypes of each.
So it looks like you're in a cold place today, Uranio. Are you already in Iceland or still in London, but just wearing a heavy jacket?
Yeah, well, we'll be in Iceland from this Thursday, and we're recording this on a Monday. And this is end of November 2023, by the way. And it's just because my office has a problem in the heating, and I need
I
to
see.
wear this indoors. But anyway,
I
let's
see.
see.
I see. I thought we were doing a special Arctic Circle episode.
No. Maybe we can do one from there.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Sorry to interrupt you.
And you are in
Okay.
Germany, yeah?
Yes, I'm in Germany. Yeah, yeah.
Nice. I
Just did
know.
a just did a really great training on the subtypes actually in Mannheim, Germany, with a beautiful group of longtime Enneagram students.
Yeah, I was very glad for you and for the students. And I know that now you're visiting your brother, which you always love to see
Mhm.
your brother, your sister-in-law, and your 2 nephews.
My niece and nephew, yeah. My nephew's in Spain at the moment, but it's
Ah,
very nice to be here. Yeah.
right. Okay, so time for talking about relationships and subtypes. One thing I want to start talking about is that um, sometimes instincts and subtypes also are even more important than type when it comes to relationships because of the energy that comes from the dominant instinct, which is part of the subtype thing. This is at least what I observe. But what do you think? What is your take on this?
Yeah, I think subtypes are so important to really understanding the specific patterns, behavior, feelings, beliefs that each person has because it is this interesting mix of the dominant instinct and the passion of the type, but also kind of the conditioned habitual aspects of type. And so when those two things mix together, they represent a really powerful part of the personality that's very automatic and very specific in terms of the 3 versions of each of the 9 types. So it gives us a lot of very detailed, precise information about what each person's personality patterns are going to be like.
Yeah, I agree. But my point is that in relationships, in special, it looks like, to me at least, that the instincts play a major role, and therefore subtypes also end up playing a very big role, more than the type dimension. And in my view, it has to do with energy that is similar or different between people, and also how easy or not as easy life gets. And there's no better or worse here. It's just that people tend, like sexual dominant people, almost can smell sexual dominant people. And there is an attraction there that happens, but it makes it easier if 2 sexual dominant people are relating, or 2 self presses, or 2 socials. But at the same time, relationships between people of different dominant instincts can be very healthy for people to do work on their instincts, and people like in a friendship or a couple that have the same instinct sometimes reinforce the problem of one another. But the point here is not as much about what's ideal, because there isn't such a thing. It's more like that ends up determining people coming closer together or not, more than type itself. I've seen in the past so many teachers saying this, and I must say that I agree with this.
Yeah, I always I hear that view, and I think there's a lot of validity to it, but I just think people misunderstand the instincts often enough that it creates a little bit of confusion. Like a lot of heart types think they're sexual dominants, or um, just the way the instinct can look really different depending on the type. Like a sexual 9 isn't going to be the same as a sexual 4 or a sexual 8. Well, I think the instinct plays a very important role. I think some teachers have overstated it. So I'm always, maybe it's a compensation. I'm always a little bit not wanting to go full on saying the instincts are more important than type, because I just think that while very true that the instincts play a big role in relationships, and understanding that is really key to understanding relationships. I also think type has a lot to do with how we experience each other.
Yeah, interesting discussion. But yeah, so the theme of relationships here, I think we need to approach it both from the perspective of the person who's someone of that subtype, and someone else relating to that person. Right? I think we
Yeah.
can say a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about each of the 27 subtypes. And in this episode, we'll just talk about the body types, types 8, 9, and 1. But in each episode, we'll talk about maybe one or two key characteristics of that subtype, starting with 8, that may represent an important theme or an important dynamic in relationship. So we'll talk about it, as you said, both from the point of view of the person who is that subtype and a potential partner of that subtype, and how that partner may experience that particular person with that particular subtype.
Yeah, and I think that for you, the listener, it will be very interesting to see how sometimes the challenges are so different between people of the same type when they have different subtypes.
Right, right.
Although there will be very similar challenges too that come from the type level, but we will emphasize here the more specific things that can be different.
Right. So, should we start with 8 and talk about the three subtypes of 8s: self
Hmm.
preservation 8, social 8, sexual 8? And of course, if you're new to the topic of subtypes, we do have an earlier episode where we talk about all about subtypes. So, if this is a new topic for you, we encourage you to listen to that first. Because we won't describe everything about each subtype, we're just going to focus on a few key aspects that probably will come up as an issue for each subtype in relationship.
Yeah, I think that as a general rule, if you are coming to Enneagram 2.0 more recently, then it's a good idea perhaps to listen to the first episodes that we did on our first season, where we covered very important parts of Enneagram theory in the way we understand them. So it's important what you said, B.
So, starting with self preservation 8, maybe you want to start by saying what you think are some important things for self preservation 8s themselves to be aware of, but also what their partners might want to look out for in terms of what pattern self preservation 8s can have in relationships that can be challenging, that may need to be worked with awareness.
Okay, I'll say two things, and then I wanna hear from you. So the first one to me is that self-press aids at times when it's a close relationship, really, close friends, or a couple of a parent and a kid. The self-press aid does so much to protect the other person, but always coming from an assumption of what they think is needed, and without necessarily listening from the other person what they want. And it's a lot about doing what they, the self-press aids, think is important, but with assumptions about that. And sometimes the effect is the opposite of what they want. Like, people feel a bit controlled and feel a little bit um, bossed around. And also, I think that another thing to observe is that self-press aids under communicate very often. They are not very prompt to talk much, and things go unexamined at times. And that also implies that they are too concrete. They don't talk about subtleties or more abstract things. And sometimes this involves feelings. And this produces sometimes issues both for them and for the other person. And of course, we can always see the good aspects of this. Like, self-press aids are perhaps the most uncomplicated of all types, which is wonderful at times in relationships. But when the person is only concrete, then it might be a problem. But
Mhm.
what do you think?
Yeah, I think self-preservation aids can be really great partners in the way that they really show up for people, and they're focused on getting basic needs met in a way that can, really be supportive of relationships. But I also think they tend to be the most defended, the most armed, and as you said, they communicate the least. So if you're in relationship, especially an intimate relationship with a self-preservation eight, sometimes it may be hard to talk about more vulnerable things. It may be hard to get beyond the concrete sort of basics of life to encourage the self-preservation eight to open up more and to share more softer feelings, or to allow themselves to be supported by the other person in basic everyday life ways that don't maybe line up with what the self-preservation eight needs and wants. They
Right.
tend to be very focused on sort of getting what they need directly, and like you say, not a very complicated way, which can be easier. But I think in a way where they may not share feelings as much, and maybe a little more private and self-contained. And so that can be challenging, especially if the partner is not an eight, or maybe someone like a heart type, who would like to connect based more on deeper feelings.
Right. Yes. So, sexual aid, maybe?
So I
Or
thought maybe we
cultural aid?
would talk a little bit about maybe some to-dos,
Oh,
some
okay.
suggestions for
Sure.
self-preservation aids themselves, and
Right.
also for the self-preservation aid partners or close friends in relationship.
Yes, correct. So, one or two suggestions that I would have for self-press aids. Um, uh, in a counter-instinctive way, forcing yourself to see and name what you're feeling and express it to the other person, and engage in conversations that are not just concrete and pragmatic. And for the other person relating with the self-press aid, make sure that if you need to talk about something that is not that easy for the self-press aid, that you start by saying, look, it's not easy for you, but it's important for me. And it's not only my issue, it's also your issue that you are too concrete. If you say something this straightforward to the self-press aid, it might work. Just don't expect that the self-press aid will come to you and say, oh yes, you know what, you're very right. No, probably the self-press aid won't say anything, but will stop resisting.
Right. I think it will be important for the self-preservation eight themselves to be aware of their tendency to be concrete, to go to focus very much on what's needed and get there in a very direct way without talking much. And it will be good for them to be aware of how much they are kind of defended in the sense of not opening up and sharing deeper feelings, and to work on that. Right. That makes it easier for the partner. But if you're someone in a relationship with a self-preservation eight, I think what can be helpful is to recognize the tendencies of the self-preservation eight, and to be as direct as possible. And sometimes you may need to come with a little bit of force yourself, or even get more comfortable with expressing anger. I was talking to someone who's a self-preservation one recently, and they have a eight partner, and they were saying, well, I don't want to express anger because this person's already angry enough. And I said, well, actually, it's very good for you to get in touch with your anger and to express it more in a more straightforward way. And it's actually going to be good practice for you to push back on that self-preservation aid, especially if you experience them being stubborn or not being open. To be very direct and assertive, and even allow yourself to express anger again in a constructive way, in a thoughtful way, in a way where you're bringing awareness to what's happening. But I also think it can be good in less stressful moments for partners of self-preservation aids to just let them know that they're very interested in what's going on inside, and that they would be very happy and pleased if they could talk at a deeper level. And they're very, to almost create more trust by expressing positive feelings toward the self-preservation aid, and really letting them know, and maybe even going first and making themselves vulnerable in a way that can model for the self-preservation aid a little bit about how they can meet in a more vulnerable space in a way that can be a positive thing for the relationship. And I think if the other person can go first and allow for vulnerability, and also express just the positives, the benefits of what can come from that, but then be patient, and go step by step with that self-preservation aid, then I think that can open up some space if the self-preservation aid is ready for that.
Yeah, and as a general rule for all eights, it's important to be completely transparent and to avoid behind the scene things or hidden agendas, and to talk about everything that's happening. And eights are among the most sensitive, perhaps the most sensitive, when it comes to feeling betrayed. And it's important to address AIDS in a very straightforward way. But that's for all
Yeah.
AIDS. Should we move
Yeah.
on to social AIDS?
Yeah, let's talk about socialates. I think with the socialates, the issue is often that they do so much for other people, in terms of protecting others, supporting others, being helpful for others, doing things for others. Sometimes maybe even more than they should do, or more than is necessary or welcomed by the other person. But they have a harder time receiving love and care. They have a harder time receiving protection. So if you're in a relationship with a socialite, it can be really important to point that out. Sometimes repeatedly on an ongoing basis, and to be assertive in really giving that person love and care and support. And they may resist, knowing they may resist, but recognizing that that will be hard for them to receive. It'll may be really hard for them to ask for help, but giving a lot of proactive support in saying, look, I think you should do less. I think you do too much, and I want to give to you. And it would make me feel good if you would allow me to support you a little more than you do.
Right. Yes. I think for social aids, it's also extremely important to uh, to if you are in a relationship with a social aid, to force the situation for you to do something for them. It's not something that will easily come from the social aid, and it's many times a blind spot for them. Like, wow, it's true that I don't receive as much as I give. But many social aides are not aware of that. And you talking about that and forcing the situation for you to do something for them is invaluable. And social weights will notice how that happens and will be very surprised. It will be difficult for them in the beginning, but it will pay off. And it's very important for them. And also not allowing them to feel like they are mothering you in whatever kind of relationship you have with them. So this is a very, very central aspect. But also, I think that social eights are perhaps among the 27 the ones that are the most sensitive when it comes to loyalty and then betrayal. So affirming that more and more, and addressing things using the value of loyalty somehow is a good thing. And um, for eight doing inner work, it's useful to understand that loyalty can be very well ego driven. It's loyalty that comes from the social eight subtype ego part.
Right, right, right. And it will help social aids for you to point that out, and to point out how exhausted they get, and how much they do and how they're overdoing. And that's not good for them, the social aid themselves, and therefore not good for anyone else. And these things can be really out of balance. Giving and receiving can be very out of balance with social aids, and they can have a hard time not taking care of everyone or taking care too much in too many ways and not, again, allowing themselves to receive.
So talking about your own needs, if you're a social weight, talking
Yeah.
about vulnerability, weaknesses that you are experiencing, asking for help, and
Mhm.
making sure that you don't overextend yourself in the relationship.
And something I like that you say and do sometimes, Uranio, is like the image of what if you as a social eight could lie down and just put your head on your partner's lap,
Yeah, I was
you
going
know?
to mention this actually for sexual aids. I think it's even more
Mm,
difficult for sexual aids. It's useful
mhm,
for all aids, in my view,
mhm.
but for
Yeah.
sexual aids, I think there is even more of kind of a pride of not doing that,
Mm,
not bending,
mhm,
not kneeling.
mhm.
I think for sexual aids, that's even more important.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it could depend on the eight, but I think with the social eight, it's a little bit like two or social two. It's like not asking for help, not allowing for that support, and then getting exhausted. And
Right.
I think that happens for social eights in the same way. So if they can rest and relax and be held by somebody else,
Yeah.
that's huge. But maybe since you've already started talking about sexual eight, maybe that's a good time to segue to sexual eight.
Yeah, okay. I think sexual aids have this tendency to really bossy people around, like nobody
Boss people,
boss
boss people around.
boss people around. Is
Yeah.
this good enough English? B
It's good enough when you say boss, but bossy people around doesn't make sense.
bossing people around. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to boss people around, or they are always bossing people around. But yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you the listeners of Enneagram 2.0 for my English crash courses during each episode. Now, yeah, so I think I think it this creates an unbalanced relationship of one person who's always in charge and never being allowing the other person to be in charge. But it's interesting. At the same time, sexual aids really like when someone takes the lead. They will never say that easily. Only aids.
Do they really though? Do they really?
Yeah, I've heard this from several sexual aides, including my daughter. I mean,
Hmm.
she says, "Yeah, look, I like people who are strong and who can let me relax a little bit." Um, but at the same time, there will be this power struggle right? The eight will be a little bit like going against that at the same time that they like that.
Mm,
So to produce some positive conflict there to see who will be in charge. But it's at the same time easy for a sexual eight to be in a friendship or a couples relationship or a family relationship when they are in charge and the other person is just following. It's easier. But deep inside, I noticed that they really want to relax a little bit with someone else that can be in charge and can have their back. They translate that as they will have my back if I need. Although this is almost always a non-spoken content, and it's very useful though to see the paradoxes that we all have. But another
mm.
thing for sexual aids is the possessivity. It's too much.
The who? The
Pos-
who?
Possessivity,
I
possessive,
don't know that word. I don't
possession,
know that word. Oh, the
being
tendency to
possessive.
want to possess the other, to be possessive. Yes.
Okay, yeah, English is funny at times, but anyway,
I like
yeah.
how you try
So
to
you
make
don't,
up new English words, though.
so you don't have the word
Possessivity.
possessivity, like
No, we don't. No, no.
possessividade in Portuguese. Yeah, okay. So
Right.
being possessive.
Being
Uh,
possessive. Yes.
yeah, so that is very central to the sexual aid character. And it is something that sexual aids have a very hard time stop being or stop doing. Those
Stopping. Yeah.
passive behaviors, uh,
Yeah.
and I think that is too much for the other person many times. So allowing yourself to not have as much information about the other person, giving the other person more freedom, because otherwise the other person feels almost like in a prison at times. So that's my main suggestion for sexual aids. But what would you
And I think it's important to remember that the word possession, which is the name, the title for the sexual aid, is also about possessing the whole scene, like being the center of attention and feeling a sense of power coming from everyone looking to you for guidance or a sense of what should be done and how to do things. And so sexual aids, I think, tend to want to exert a lot of control in relationships. They want to have attention of the other person and also sort of be in charge of what happens. And I think one of the things that's important to know is that often when sexual eights are expressing that desire for control, it can feel hard for the other person. Like this person is trying to have too much control over what I do. But I think it's important to remember that that's often coming from their heart. Sexual eights can actually be quite emotional. They can even look like heart types. Sometimes I've had trouble discerning between sexual four and sexual eight because sexual eight can be sometimes a little bit softer and emotional in certain moments, but also in terms of having a lot of emotional uh, expression and need for connection on an emotional level. So I think it's important to recognize that if your sexual aid is wanting to control the way things are going or what you're doing, that often that's coming from a place of care and affection or um, desire for connection. So I think it's important to see that there's a good part of that, that's sometimes just the way they show their love. And so to recognize, okay, if this person's trying to control me, the motivation or the intention might not all be bad. It may be, this is how I love people. I love big. I have a big heart and I want to take you over and I want to take you in and possess you and tell you and have you submit to me, you know. And I think again, it's important to be direct when that doesn't work for you if you're in relationship with a sexual eight. To recognize this may be coming from love, but it may be too much, or it may be invasive, or it may not be what you want. And to push back in important ways, and make more space for yourself and ask the eight to make more space for you. to almost, if there's a stage on the relation that is where the relationship takes place, the sexual 8 may take up a lot of that space on stage, and you may need to sometimes push that 8 a little bit to make room for yourself, but also ask for more room, and to be heard, and to have your voice also play a role in the decisions that you make collectively, and not just have the other person, that the sexual 8, be the one in charge.
Right, right. I like all of that. Yeah. So should we move on to nines?
Yes, let's move on to nines.
Okay, so I think what is essential to know about self-press nines is that it's not too different from self-press eights in the sense that they under communicate and they are very concrete. It's very, very similar. But of course, you need to always approach the nine creating a little bit of rapport and listening and just establishing good vibes and not as direct. Oh, actually, you need to be direct, but you need to have that good energy happening and creating harmonious environment when you communicate with a self-press 8 self-press 9, sorry. But other than that, I think it's very, very similar. The one of the problems of these relationships is that it's very much based in concrete, making it good for being uncomplicated, but also not having as much space to discuss problems that are a little more subtle. And that can prove to be a problem in the long run in relationships when this kind of thing cannot be talked about. And yeah, so just remembering things about my mother now, who was a self-press
Mm,
9 herself. Uh,
mhm,
and I think some of the issues she had with my father that never really got solved in their 50 plus years marriage is that because she wouldn't value as much the specific things that she needed, and that
mm,
she thought were not important because she would be more pragmatic and pay attention to the ordinary daily processes of life.
mhm,
I think that if you are a self-press 9, it's good to avoid uh, being just practical and being just concrete. But another thing here is this is the most stubborn of all 27 subtypes. And so notice your passive aggression in the form of stubbornness.
mhm,
And when you notice that you are going there, just make sure you examine what you're not happy with and that is leading you to act that way, and force
mhm,
yourself to talk about that before it escalates too much inside you and becomes very almost impossible for you to talk about. So when there is too much that you have narcotized or you're not
mhm,
seeing that you are angry with and for a long time, go to a good therapist and process all of that with the therapist until you are okay with talking to the other person about, and before, hopefully before you kill the relationship because of that.
mhm. Yeah, I was also going to focus on how self-preservation nines have a tendency to be stubborn and hard to move. And especially if they get a sense that the other person wants something from them, or wants them to do something, or especially if they're putting pressure on them, or even being tempted to manipulate them into doing something, that the self-preservation nine will not move. That only enhances the stubbornness and any potential passive resistance or passive aggression. So I think when you're in relationship with a self-preservation nine, of course, they can also be excessively adaptable, right? Sometimes they can adapt too much to the other person, but then if it's been too much, or if they feel like the other person wants something from them they don't want to do or give, then they can get stubborn. So I think it's about um, communicating, if you're in relationship with a self-preservation nine, in a way that lets the self-preservation nine know where you stand, create, be very, as you said, direct about your needs and wants, and also express a lot of care and interest in what the self-preservation nine wants and needs and what might be good for that for the nine, right? And so to create some space to talk about that, but to really listen to what the nine wants and not just try to assert what you want. And so really to create space for whatever the nine needs to say or express is if you're really interested in and you care about what they want. And also inviting anger. I think if a person, if a self-preservation nine feels they already feel like it's not okay to get angry, and they already tend to sit on their anger. But if you invite it, if you say, look, I really, if something's bothering you, I really want to know it, and you give them time and space to see if to kind of get into space where it feels like it might be okay to voice it. Also remembering that self-preservation nines can have a lot of fear about expressing their anger, because the anger often builds up and they can be kind of explosive. So it's almost like they fear really destroying the relationship or really hurting the other person, because they do tend to sit on their anger. And when it does come out, it may have built up for a while. So I think that if you're in relationship with a self-preservation nine, it's expressing interest, but also in smaller ways, saying if they're frustrated about something, I want to hear it. If there's something that you're wanting that you're not getting or not feeling supported in, I want to know. And then it's on the self-preservation nine, I think, to learn to say a little bit more what they want and need, and express more feeling as opposed to withdrawing, because I think self-preservation nines have a tendency to they may feel more comfortable alone. They're very oriented toward feeling comfortable, so withdrawing and kind of doing your own thing can be something that feels very good and tempting. And especially if the self-preservation nine withdraws and is expressing stubbornness at the same time, that can be particularly important for the self-preservation nine to know and see and work against, and also for the partner of the nine to understand and to have some empathy for where that comes from. Sometimes self-preservation nines, I think, can feel like they get run over or taken over by other people's agendas, and so they can, frustration can build up that they have a hard time expressing.
Right, right. Yeah, just before moving on to social nine, I want to say two things I consider to be very useful for when you relate to any nine in your life. One is make sure that you contribute with the harmony in the relationship. Don't leave that only to the nine. And the
Mm,
second thing is to always remember not to force the nine uh, into any particular direction, because it simply doesn't work. But now let's move on to social nine. I think
mhm,
one of the main issues I see in relationships for social nines is that it's very hard for them to concentrate on one person and not to be
mm,
scattered around, giving attention to everybody. And people get a bit frustrated, like they want proximity with that nine in their lives, but it's a little bit for a lot of people.
mhm,
So that is a main issue that I see in one-on-one relationships. When sexual instinct is second, it's a bit better, but still I see that it's very, very hard for people who are with social nines to feel like they never have enough of the sexual the social nine for them as much as they wanted. Another thing is the social nine tends to do things for others a lot, not only in groups, also in
mhm,
relationships, but like being
mhm.
extremely dedicated to a friend
Right, right.
when it's a one-on-one relationship too. So here's the
Mhm,
problem. Uh, they don't have much time only for one person, and in the short amount of time they have, they are doing something for that person, and
mm,
that creates some issues. And of course, the way to solve all of that is to block yourself for quality time,
mhm,
block your calendar for quality time with that one person who's very important for you. Stop just thinking that everybody's the same and giving
mhm,
attention in such like a similar way to everybody, and prioritize a bit more some people and block your calendar. And then when you are there, make sure it's a balanced relationship. It's not only you doing, and that you're not only doing, that you're just being with a person somehow. But what would you say?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that the social nine also can be someone who takes on the role of doing a lot of things in groups and individual relationships and in the family. And of course, social nines lose themselves in activity, right? So doing a lot, and often that doing a lot is motivated by a deeper need to belong. And so there can be this feeling like I've got to keep doing for the other, to in some ways validate my usefulness to them,
Yeah.
and to some way to belong and to have to be important. But of course, they never take in their importance. They kind of stay too humble. They stay having a sense of that they don't belong. And so I think on the one hand, they need to, so it helps social nines to express their feelings more to others, whether it's sadness at not belonging or exhaustion from doing so much and not letting people see how much you do and how hard you work, and taking the risk to slow down a little bit and get in touch with your own feelings and then share those feelings. And then I think for partners who are in a relationship with social nines, it's really good to encourage them with some force, to slow down, to talk about their feelings, to express what you appreciate about the social nine, and really um, emphasize the need that you have for them to take that in. Because I think sometimes nines get so busy and focusing on what they do for others that they don't focus on not only their own agenda, but also their own need for recognition or support or love. It's like they get resigned to the fact that they're just not going to get that. And they just have to keep working hard for everybody else to even have a hope of getting a little bit of what they need. And I think they, unlike twos who may get a little resentful at a certain point if they're not getting recognized for what they do, they'll sort of stay in in that place of kind of resignation of I'm never really gonna belong. I'm never really gonna get the love that I need. And so I think when people are in relationship with social nines, they need to really help them see that they do belong. That sometimes it's just a habit to get stuck in that place of I'm not valued. And so express how much you care and why you value that person for all they do. And so that on the one hand, they can stop doing so much. And on the other hand, they can show up more in the relationship to be able to receive the love and the care that you have for them.
Mm, yeah, beautiful. Yeah, and I notice that several social nines feel that they always owe something else to everybody. It's like they bear some guilt with them of not doing enough, even though it's very clear that they are doing already 120%. So watch out
Yeah.
for that.
And I also think sometimes social nines, even though they do so much, in the background, they're kind of getting angrier and angrier about how
Mhm.
much they do and not getting recognized or not being supported. But then, of course, it's hard for them to ask to be supported or ask for the recognition they need and take it in. But it's also important for them to express that anger. So allowing for room for the nine to express more feelings, to get in touch with their feelings and not just the sensation of that, and to open up to receiving from others and not having to work so hard to get what they need.
Yeah, the behavioral pattern that our subtype creates also unavoidably sets us up for failure and for some problem coming from that very behavior. But let's move
Right.
on to sexual nines.
Yeah.
I think sexual nines merge with the other person in a way that they really just forget who they are, and they
Mhm.
become the other person. And that is usually not something pleasant for the other person. Like the
Mhm.
other person feels like, uh, where is that other person in the relationship, right? So it's more like I become the other more than the two of us merge. I become
Mhm.
you. I transform into you. I'm not doing any image game, by the way. I'm just being absorbed by your energy, your agenda, your priorities, your ways of thinking without noticing. And it doesn't need to be a romantic relationship, can be a friendship, can be with a parent, with a sibling, or with your own kid. And it's interesting to see how sexual nines find comfort in doing that, but also they don't feel like truly fulfilled, and that escalates little by little to a situation where they don't feel happy. And there is this confusion for nines between being comfortable and being happy.
Mhm.
So that's a problem in the long run, mainly. And it's super important for sexual nines to start questioning what they want, what is in it for them in this relationship, and also what would be good moments to be alone and to not be with that other person. And then also like diversifying, talking with other people, not only that person that absorbs you too much.
Mhm. Right, right, right. Yeah, I think for sexual nines, there's a big issue with not feeling that there are any boundaries in the relationship. So losing yourself in the other person and taking on the attitudes, viewpoints, feelings of the other person, and not not having the space to be in touch with your own feelings and your own agenda and your own sense of purpose in life, and really having your sense of purpose be the other person, which can be not leave enough room for you, the nine, to be who you are, and not leave enough room for your partner to be able to see you as a separate person as well. So recognizing the necessity for boundaries is really good for the nine, and recognizing that doesn't mean a negative kind of separation. It actually, having boundaries allows you to be more truly close. It's a paradox. So if you're the sexual nine, recognizing you may need time alone, more than you allow yourself to have. You may need to do more things separately, because it's only when you have physical separation that you can be more in touch with yourself. And again, depending on how much inner work you've done. But it can be, so seeing that it's positive to have sort of some element of a separate life, with between, so that you can find yourself more, be yourself, and not lose yourself so much in the other person. And I think if you're a partner with a sexual nine, it's important to see that and really encourage the sexual nine to disagree with you, to have their feelings, even if their feelings are different than yours or might create conflict. If you're a partner for the sexual nine, you're doing them a big favor if you send them the message that it's okay to be separate some of the time, that some degree of separation allows actually for a better kind of closeness, a better level of closeness, because it's not merger, which isn't really closeness. It's just the erasing of boundaries, and sometimes the erasing of the sexual nine in the relationship. It becomes one plus one equals one instead of one plus one equals two. And so, the sexual nine themselves taking on the responsibility to, look more inside themselves and not just to the other person, and the other person making that a priority too, to recognize that even though sometimes it may feel good to have the sexual nine so focused on you, or so aligned with you, or so intertwined with you, that it actually makes for a better relationship overall when there is more intentional prioritization of some degree of separateness and some degree of discord or disagreement, some room for that, because it also makes the a relationship more juicy, if there is some level of conflict or disagreement or difference. So making a lot of intentional room for that can be very positive.
Yeah, I also sometimes suggest to sexual nines that they determine a place in their houses that is only for them, in which they
Hmm.
will be alone. And what I mean by being alone is not even your pet, because not
Hmm.
sexual nines sometimes also merge with pets just the same.
Hmm.
And
Right.
so going there will be counterinstinctive, uncomfortable, spending time in there because you need to look at yourself, but do that. And then you will pretty soon face things that, needs that are unattended for you. But let's move
Right.
on to ones. So self press one, would you like to start?
Sure. Self-preservation ones can be very self-critical, and they repress anger a lot. And both of those things can impact relationships a lot, right? Because the focus on their own flaws, on their own mistakes, can sometimes take up a lot of their energy, and it can make it hard for them to show up in relationships in a more open, confident way because they can be so focused on all the things they're doing wrong or on all the ways they're so imperfect, instead of focusing on what a great person they are, you know. And I think it makes for easier flow in relationships when the self-preservation one works on being less self-critical, less harsh on themselves, and focusing on something other than the things that are wrong with them or wrong with what they're doing. So when the self-preservation one can work on being more confident and more free and not doing self-improvement as much, but just allowing themselves to express their feelings more openly, and especially express anger more, because sometimes self-preservation ones can really hold back on expressing anger in relationships, a little bit like nines. Then it can come out, it can either leak out more than nines, or it can, lead to periodic explosions, none of which is good for the one or the person in relationship for the one. So if the one can work on allowing for that anger more, and even if it's irritation or frustration or resentment, to express that more and know that's good for the relationship, and for partners of self-preservation ones to recognize how hard they are on themselves. So be really sensitive when it comes to anything you communicate that can sound like criticism to the one, but also encouraging and allowing the self preservation one to share more feelings, to relax more, to have more fun. Using more humor with the one can also be a good way of highlighting the ways that they're hard on themselves or the way they can loosen up and be lighter.
Yeah, I want to concentrate in what I'm going to say on the impact on others um, by a self preservation one. Because of the process orientation, the detail orientation, and the belief that there is always one right way to do things, and the stress with each little thing, sometimes the other person ends up feeling one of two ways. Either I am too criticized by you, even though you don't say much, by what you do, or I'm never enough for you because I'll never ever get to your standards. And
Mhm.
also, sometimes it can be like a bit boring because I don't want to follow all small rules in my life. So it's useful to know this impact, and then having fun and humor and doing small mistakes together. And um, I think that's a big, beautiful antidote for self-pressed ones and the people in relationship with them. It's extremely important to relax the inner critic for self-pressed ones. So yeah, and observe the many times that you start paying attention to details that are not very important actually in the bigger picture.
Right, right. And if you're a self-preservation one and you're listening to what Uranio just said, please try to take all this in, not as another reason to beat yourself up,
Mm.
but with compassion for yourself, right? There are reasons why we do what we do. And I think it helps self-preservation ones to see the underlying dynamics, maybe the pressure that was put on you in childhood or the pressure you put on yourself and where that comes from and how that can create anxiety and even more intense self-criticism, and recognize that that whole setup, it really is hard for you to live and have relationships and feel free and feel good about yourself. So it's a lot about really trying to end the habit of being harsh on yourself and to really open up to seeing all the good in you. Because, and maybe even asking your partner to share what they like about you and to help you take that good stuff in so that you can stop the very difficult to stop habit of focusing on what you're doing wrong or how you're not good enough or all your mistakes, and to just sort of leave that in the past and allow yourself to feel free and have fun and see all the good things that are happening in your relationship and how, at least 50% of that comes from you.
What about social ones, B?
So with social ones, I think social ones, are a lot of times focused on really doing the right thing, and they can get very rigid about that. And part of that is wanting to be a good role model. And it can be often that's very much for the group, for others in general, but also in the relationship, like trying to be the best partner or trying to find out the right ways to do things in life so that that impacts the partner well. But it's the rigidity of that, and the repressed anger that can go along with that, that often create problems in relationship. So for the social one, it's daring to be a bad role model. To daring. The other day, I have to say, so my I'm here in Dusseldorf with my brother, who's a social one, and the other day, his daughter, who's 15, rode her bike by a place where he was at a party outside the party, uh, doing something that he did not want her to see him doing, which was smoking a cigarette.
Hmm.
And he was horrified. And she was shocked, right? Because he doesn't let her see him do this. And I said, hey, I think this is a good moment for you taking in that it's good for you to be a bad role model, because there's so much pressure he puts on himself to do everything right and model that for others. It was hard for him to take that in, but I think it's like good to if you're a social one, allow yourself to do the wrong thing once in a while. Allow yourself to have your partner tell you what the right thing is and to be more flexible in the things you do, and to use, again, similar to the self preservation one, to use more humor and lighten up and not always need to be the one who's doing things right, and who's showing up and putting pressure on himself, to be the good role model at all times. It's good to let yourself free out of the cage a little bit more.
Yeah, I think social ones are probably the ones that look the more serious and smile less and tell less jokes and don't come across as being relaxed. Although I also think they are not as tense in their bodies as other ones are, but they don't sound relaxed. And like smiling is something that people miss sometimes in social ones, and some social ones are great about that or have developed to be like that. When there is humor, many times it's that kind of person that everybody considers to be fun, but the person doesn't know. So it's a little bit more that style, but being more informal most of all, because there is a tendency to be a bit more formal in the way they
Yeah.
communicate, that sometimes makes, brings some fear on people,
Mhm.
especially if it's a professional relationship. people are afraid of the social one, not because the social one gets mad, but because, you know, there seems to be rules for relationships, for how to communicate, and they are more like implicit, and it's something that makes people step on eggshells at times when approaching a social one. So I'd say that not only doing things that are wrong and becoming a bad role model, but creating more informality in
Mhm.
all the environments you're in.
Mhm. 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 Yeah, I think that for the partners of social one, to be relaxed yourself, to joke around, to make fun of things in life in general, to encourage the social one to indulge and to share more of themselves that they don't think is so perfect. I think all of these things, and I think while expressing a lot of affection and love for the whole person, not just for their ability to be right or to figure out the right way or to be dutiful. I think to really appreciate things about the social one that the social one may not think are like the good things about them, and to leave a lot of room for being flexible, and for encouraging what the social one might even think of as bad behavior, and for not bringing rules or judgment yourself to the social one, because the social one may already be judging themselves a lot inside in ways they don't really show.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also interestingly, social ones often express they have trouble actually being in a group, and so, as a partner of a social nine, inviting them into groups and offering them a lot of support because they can feel kind of awkward, actually. They feel more comfortable being the leader or the facilitator of the group, or somehow being the role model outside the group, the teacher. And so, a partner of a social one can help social ones be more flexible and relaxed by supporting them a lot, creating a bridge and supporting them a lot with being with others in a way that they can feel more permission to relax. And like you said, I like the way you put that, to be less formal and less on stage or less pressured about, being a certain way.
And perhaps look funnier, like in the way you speak, the language you use, or how you dress. That's also very welcome in relationships. But
Yeah,
then,
one last thing.
yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
I'm sorry, I thought you were going
No,
on.
no, no, I was going to move on to sexual one. Go ahead. And
Yeah, just one last thing I want to add, that one thing I really appreciate about my sister-in-law, who's a social two in relationship with a social one, is she really appreciates the efforts my brother makes. So sometimes, even if like the social one is being a bit rigid, or hard to cooperate with because of that inflexibility, appreciating the efforts and the intention behind what they're doing, even while you let them know that maybe the outcome isn't necessary. You don't have to do everything right, but you appreciate the place that that's coming from, which is often a really sincere desire to support others and be a good partner. So appreciating the effort and intention underneath, while making it clear that they don't always have to meet the high standard that they themselves hold themselves to.
yeah, I understand that is useful in the relationship, but I must say that I think the goal for once is to make less effort in everything, and to be more relaxed and just give up, being trying to whatever. So
Right.
that's also a good way to go. But sexual
Okay.
ones, what would you say about sexual ones in relationships?
Sexual ones, I would say, I think it's important for them to realize, again, all ones to be aware of their anger, but especially sexual ones, because I think they can be more angry. Their anger can be a little bit more freely expressed sometimes, and that can be a positive thing in certain cases. But I think they also at times need to learn to channel that anger more consciously and be more of aware of it at an ongoing basis, because sometimes sexual ones hold it in, hold it in, hold it in, and then really let it out in a bigger way. So it can be good for sexual ones to acknowledge their own anger and have it in their relationships, but in ways where it's more integrated and channeled, and as opposed to held back, but then really let out in ways that may not always be the best.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with all that. And I think one critical thing for sexual ones to do, thinking of relationships, is to allow other people to take the lead and to follow, because they can be very bossy in trying to do things in a certain way by means of changing the other person. So
Yes.
allowing the other person to take the lead in the way they want to take the lead, and then following without showing your criticism, and by following trying to negotiate with all your thoughts of what's wrong and just going with that, that can be brilliant, because then chances are that the sexual one will also perceive how much energy they have been spending in doing things their own way all the time,
Mhm.
and modeling what is the good way or what the other person needs to do. So relationships can benefit a lot when there is co-leadership. Like, I do this, you do that, you are in charge of this and I follow, then I can do that and you follow, and not and create more balance in that. And again, in whatever relationship we are talking about.
Right. And sexual ones do try to criticize the other more than themselves. And so they can be always on the lookout for what needs to be fixed. And they can be active to the point of being a bit invasive and telling other people how they should be, and fixing other people. And what I've heard from sexual ones is they especially aim that at the partner, right? But they can, of course, do that to family members and friends as well. So it's important for a partner of a sexual one to let them know the impact of that, if there is an impact, right? And to allow them to see how both people in a relationship contribute to the dynamic or contribute to what's going on. And to be able to communicate with the sexual one what might be appreciated and not appreciated about their tendency to see what needs to be changed or perfected in the world and in their partners.
Yes, yes, good point, B. I appreciate talking about the body types, and looking forward to the heart types next.
Me too. So I think that's a great place to stop for today. And next time we'll be talking about the heart types in relationships. And that's the heart types in terms of each of the 9 subtypes of the 3 heart types.
Right, let's do that soon.
So thank you for listening. We hope you join us again on the Enneagram 2.0 podcast when we talk about all things Enneagram.